It's a foggy morning on the Swallow's Nest homestead, and today we're talking about tomatoes and some tomato care, staking tomatoes primarily. So let's take a look at our tomato beds. All right, this is one of my beds of tomatoes, and as you can see, I have some other things growing in here, obviously. I have some volunteer amaranth. That's what this is here and here. And some of them I'll probably pull out, but for the most part, they kind of help keep down the weeds. This is buckwheat, which I'm trying for the first time under tomatoes. I read it was suggested by Elliot Coleman in the new Organic Gardener as part of his cover crop rotation. So we're trying that. Unfortunately, we had a very cool, wet spring. So our tomatoes are not as big as they normally would because we live in a pretty cool climate. Also, these tomatoes should have been staked up quite a while ago, but we were busy trying to get moved into our new house. So the garden got a little bit, put a little bit lower on the priority list. So, need some weeding. Okay, so you can see we've got some good sized tomatoes on here. So one thing to keep in mind with tomatoes is you should always prune the lower leaves. The leaves should never be touching the ground because that makes them more susceptible to blight when, especially if you're doing overhead watering, because the soil then can splash up onto those leaves and contaminate the plants with blight. So it's good to come in and prune off these lower leaves so that they don't touch the ground. Another thing that a lot of people do, I tend not to do this, and partly because I'm just kind of a lazy gardener, but prune off some people call them suckers or shoots or whatever, but what they are the little growth that comes in. You can see here in the crook of the branch here. Some people like to pinch those off and prune them, and they say it gets better production on the tomatoes. So that's something to consider too. We've got some good blossoms, and we've had some good warm days the last few days. And we're going to have really warm days next week too. So hopefully that'll be really good for our tomatoes. They'll really like that. But what we really need to do is get these guys staked up. So let's take a look at some ways to stake up tomatoes. Okay, you can see this looks like a pretty typical tomato cage. This one is actually coated. I'm not sure exactly what it's coated with, not maybe vinyl or something. They're a little more expensive to buy coated, and this one's a heavier gauge. You can see it's pretty good diameter on the metal. These, I don't remember how much these cost. These guys are 10 years old. So that gives you an idea. When you invest a little bit more in a tomato cage, don't go for the cheapest, smallest gauge ones you can find that are galvanized, because they'll last you 1 or 2 seasons. For $5 more, you get one of these heavier gauge ones that are coated. Like I said, this one has lasted us 10 years. These ones work pretty well. They are always an option. They're an economical option. What I tend to do, I do use these 2 different ways. Sometimes I will put them in between 2 plants and then tie the plants to the outside, because that makes them go a little bit further so that you don't need as many. Or if you have just, tomatoes planted in different areas and not in a row like I do here, then you can just use put it over the one plant when it's small. So that's one option for staking tomatoes. This is another cage that we have. This one's a little different in that it's wider at the bottom and it gets narrower as it goes to the top. And originally, these are really heavy. These are almost twice the diameter the metal is as the regular looking tomato cages. And they have little forks at the bottom. I originally bought these to put things like cucumbers and melons and other vining squash, things like that on. But I found that those fruits are often too heavy and they just fall off before they're ripe. So we kind of quit using them for that. These were an investment. We have 2 of them. They were $25 a piece, but they are going to last so long. Now, in theory, if I had planted the tomatoes with these in place, I probably could have planted a tomato on each corner and tied them up. Though they might get a little too crowded that way. So I would probably only, again, like the other tomato cage, put this between 2 plants and tie them on either side to try to make the most of them. If I find more of these, I will probably buy them. I haven't, like I said, we just happened on them in a hardware store and thought they were so heavy duty they were worth the investment. And so I only have the 2, unfortunately. Okay, so we have a cage in place here. And you can see I have tied, ooh, leaves getting in the way. I have loosely tied the tomato to the cage. This helps keep it upright. You don't want to tie it too tight because if this stalk gets too thick, you could cut it off and break it. I also use a slip knot so that I can easily pull it off if I need to. And then once this gets taller, I'll probably also tie it here. Just try to keep it growing upward and so that it's not laying on the ground. I know in some climates, like I know I have some family in Eastern Washington, which is really dry, high desert in the summer. And my great aunt would just let her tomatoes trail on the ground because they were so dry, they didn't have problems with blight. But being on the west side of the Cascades, and you can see how foggy it is here this morning. It's very damp and very moist here, even though we're in our dry season and we won't get any measurable rain for 8 to 10 weeks. These tomatoes can still be susceptible to blight because of watering or because of just the moisture in the air. So something to keep in mind if you are in a damp or humid climate. Okay, so the fog burned off and it's really bright out here now. So we've moved on to the other tomato bed, and since I used all the cages I had on the first bed, we're going to try something different with the second bed. I'm a big supporter of using what you have, and we just happen to have 2 random T-posts hanging around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I'm going to use those. Okay, so this is the end of the bed, and I've started driving this T-post in, and I'm going to put one at each end. As usual, we hit a rock when we were driving in the post, so on the 3rd try, I asked my husband to help me and he got it in there. So now we'll string up some twine and get those tomatoes staked up so they don't fall over on the ground. So there are a number of different ways you could do this to stake these up. Originally what I was going to do was attach a cross piece here about 6 to 8 inches on either side and run it to the other end. But I think I'm going to do something different because I don't have that handy. So I think I'm just going to run it to the other end and maybe do a crisscross around a couple of plants to kind of give them extra support, and then bring it back to this end. So I'm going to do that and I'll show you when it's done. Okay, so you can see the first one I did was about 1 foot off the ground, and I just basically went to the post on the other end, wrapped it around at once so it doesn't slip, and then came back this way. Now obviously this would have been a lot easier to do if I hadn't waited until the buckwheat got so tall. So lesson learned there, stake the tomatoes earlier. Okay, now I'm going to do a second one about another 18 inches up. Some of these guys are getting pretty tall, so they need that extra support, and then we'll be done. Okay, so we have 2 rows now that are about, or 2 strings that are about 18 inches apart. You can see one here and one is down here kind of in the shade. So here, like here's one tomato that's got just a few little tomatoes on it, and we'll just, as it gets taller, some of the parts get taller, we'll just make sure that they stay between the string and stay up off the ground. So I'm gonna have to come and check them regularly to make sure that they are staying on the inside. That one there is already trying to escape. This one's not quite tall enough, so it'll have to be adjusted. That one's looking nice. All right, so that's 2 ways that we stake tomatoes. There's lots of other options out there, but those are our preferred methods. So thanks for watching. I hope you got a couple of new ideas on how to use tomato cages and how to stake your tomatoes. Be sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments below, what's your preferred way to stake tomatoes? We'll see you next time.